Grace Bennett had worked in the Cole mansion for 8 months, and in that time she had learned the precise weight of invisibility. It wasn't heavy exactly. It was more like a kind of air she moved through and present, enough to carry trays and refill glasses and smooth wrinkles from tablecloths, absent enough that the people she served rarely looked at her twice. She had made her peace with it. A job was a job, and this one paid well enough to cover her mother's medication and still leave a little for the small apartment above the laundromat on 5th Street. Grace did not need to be seen. She only needed to be steady. The night of the engagement party, the Cole estate had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers doubled in their reflections across marble floors. A 12-piece orchestra tuning quietly in the corner. 400 of the city's wealthiest guests circulating beneath silk, drapery in shades of ivory and gold. Vanessa Sterling, the bride-to-be, moved through the crowd in a floor-length red gown, diamonds at her throat catching the chandelier light with every turn of her head, laughing the practiced laugh of a woman who had spent her whole life being watched and had never once minded it. Grace had been assigned to the champagne service that evening, weaving carefully between designer gowns and tailored tuxedos with a silver tray balanced against her palm, the crystal flutes trembling faintly with each step. She had done this 100 times. She knew how to angle her body through a crowd without disturbing a single hem, but halfway across the ballroom, a guest stepped backward without looking, colliding with Grace's shoulder hard enough to send the tray tilting. And though Grace managed to save most of the glasses, one flute slipped free and struck the marble. Champagne sprang upward in a pale arc that caught the hem of Vanessa's gown. The ballroom did not go silent immediately. It took Vanessa's voice to do that. "Are you serious?" Vanessa's words cracked across the room like a whip, sharp enough that the string quartet actually faltered mid-phrase. She spun toward Grace, staring down at the small wet stain blooming across $4,000 of French silk, her face contorting from surprise into something colder and more deliberate. "Do you have any idea what this dress cost? Do you have any idea what I am worth compared to you?" "I'm so sorry," Grace said quietly, already kneeling to gather the broken glass, her hands moving fast and careful despite the heat rising in her face. "It was an accident. I'll have it cleaned immediately. You'll have it cleaned," Vanessa laughed. But there was no warmth in it, only a performance for the crowd now gathering at a careful distance. Phones lowering, conversations stalling into silence. "Do you think a dry cleaner fixes couture? Do you think anything you could possibly do fixes anything?" She stepped closer, looking down at Grace still kneeling amid shards of crystal. "You people come into these houses and you think proximity to money makes you special. It doesn't. You're staff. You're replaceable. You're nothing." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody moved. Grace kept her eyes on the floor, on the broken glass, on her own hands, because looking up felt like it would cost her something she couldn't afford to lose in front of 400 strangers. Vanessa wasn't finished. She reached out, seized the near-empty tray from Grace's hands, and let it clatter to the marble with a deliberate, echoing crash, the sound ringing through the ballroom like a verdict. "Clean this up," Vanessa said, loud enough for the back row to hear, "and then get out of my sight before I have you fired tonight." What Vanessa did not know, what almost no one in that ballroom knew, and was that Nathaniel Cole had returned from a phone call in the east, hallway 3 sentences earlier, and had stopped just past the ballroom's carved double doors, one hand still resting on the frame, watching the entire scene unfold from a distance, close enough to hear every word and far enough that neither woman had noticed him yet. Nathaniel had built Cole Industries from a single manufacturing contract into a company worth billions, and in doing so had learned to read a room faster than almost anyone alive. Who postured, who performed, who told the truth when they thought no one of consequence was listening. He watched Grace's hands, steady despite the tremor he could see in her shoulders, gathering broken glass without complaint, without a single word of defense. He watched Vanessa's face, flushed with something that wasn't embarrassment but enjoyment, the particular satisfaction of a woman who had just reminded a room full of people exactly where power lived. And Nathaniel remembered with sudden clarity a Tuesday 3 months earlier that Vanessa knew nothing about. His father, Walter Cole, had suffered a stroke that spring, and in the slow, Humiliating months of recovery that followed. It had been Grace, not the hired night nurse, not Vanessa, who visited twice in 4 months and stayed for photographs, who sat with Walter in the evenings when his own hands shook too badly to hold a cup of tea. Nathaniel had come home late one night to find Grace reading aloud from an old paperback western, her voice low and unhurried, while his father listened with his eyes closed and something like peace on his face for the first time in weeks. She had never mentioned it to Nathaniel directly. He had only learned of it by accident, glimpsing it through a half-open door, and had said nothing at the time because Grace had seemed almost embarrassed to be caught being kind, as though kindness were something to apologize for in a house like this one. He thought of that now, watching her kneel on the marble in a room full of people who had decided, in the space of 30 seconds, that she was worth nothing at all. Nathaniel stepped through the doorway. Vanessa. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the particular authority of a man who rarely needed to raise it, and the ballroom's remaining murmur died instantly. Vanessa turned, her expression shifting into practiced warmth, so fast it might have fooled anyone who hadn't just watched what came before it. Nathaniel, darling, I heard what you were just. He crossed the floor and crouched beside Grace without a second thought, gathering 2 pieces of broken crystal into his own palm before looking up at her. Are you hurt? Grace blinked at him, startled into stillness. No, sir, I'm fine. I just need to. You don't need to do anything, Nathaniel said, except stand up. He rose and offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Grace took it and let him help her to her feet, the entire ballroom watching now with the particular hush of people witnessing something they would spend the next week describing to everyone they knew. He turned to Vanessa. I want you to understand something, and I want everyone in this room to hear it. Since apparently, we've decided this is a public conversation. His voice remained level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. This woman sat with my father for hours every evening this spring when he couldn't lift a spoon without help, when the pain made him too proud to let anyone see him cry except her. She never told me. I found out by accident, and when I asked her about it, she looked embarrassed, as if being decent to a sick old man were something she needed to justify. He looked at Grace, and something in his expression softened before turning back to Vanessa, hardening again. You've been engaged to me for 11 months, and you've asked my father exactly one question in that entire time, and it was about the seating chart for tonight. Nathaniel, this is hardly the place. You made it the place, he said. You made a woman kneel on broken glass in front of 400 people because a champagne glass fell. Grace has quietly kept this family together during the worst months of my father's life, and I have watched you tonight treat her like she isn't a person. He paused, and the silence stretched long enough that even the orchestra didn't dare fill it. I think we're done, Vanessa. I think we've been done for a while, and I was too distracted to notice until right now. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed once, the color draining from her face's 400 witnesses absorbed what had just happened in real time. She looked around the ballroom, searching for an ally, an exit, anything, and found only careful, curious silence. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the far doors, her red gown trailing behind her like something already forgotten, and the crowd parted to let her pass the way a crowd parts for weather. Nathaniel turned back to Grace, who stood amid the wreckage of a tray and a ruined evening, looking as though she wasn't entirely certain what had just happened either. I'm sorry you had to go through that, he said quietly, just for her. You didn't deserve a single second of it. You didn't have to do that, Grace said, especially not in front of everyone. Yes, I did, Nathaniel said. You've spent months being kind to my family and asking nothing in return. Not even acknowledgement. The least I could do was make sure the truth got the same audience the cruelty did. In the weeks that followed, the story of that night traveled through the city in the particular way scandal does among people with too much money and too little to occupy their attention. The broken engagement, the billionaire who'd stopped his own party to defend a maid, the fiancé who hadn't been seen at a single society function since. But Grace found she cared less about the gossip than about something quieter. The way Walter Cole, recovering steadily now, had started introducing her to visitors not as the woman who helps, but simply as Grace, his voice warm with something that sounded unmistakably like pride. The way Nathaniel began stopping by the kitchen some evenings, just to ask about her mother, and stayed longer than the question required. The way for the first time in 8 months of careful invisibility, Grace Bennett walked through that house and felt, without needing to explain it to anyone, entirely and unmistakably seen. She still worked in that house, but it no longer felt like the same house at all.